Yeah, shall we get started?
Yeah.
So, welcome on behalf of Chisel. I'm the founder and CEO of Chisel. Just to introduce you to panel, we have Yousuf. He's multiple things. He's my neighbor, he's my investor. So, Ridge invested in our first round. And he's also partner at Ridge Ventures, ex-CIO.
Few companies.
Few companies.
Yes.
And sometimes mistaken for valet parking. That's it. That's the time, basically. But general partner Ridge Ventures, thank you for being here. Super excited. We're going to be doing more of these. We've already discussed, so this was the first of a few. Ridge has been around 15 plus years. We just raised our last fund last year, which is about $180 million. We're investing out of that into B2B software companies. We only invest in B2B software companies. We're very sure that there's money to be made, investments to be made in other sectors, but this is all we know. We love talking to founders and working with founders who've got big visions or building companies that are solving problems, which is why Praful I got to know, mainly because of the neighborhood. But then I was like, well, he's got amazing experience and he's got a good vision about building an amazing product, and we want to back that. And before that, I was an investor in Productive, an advisor, and Ashish will tell you about more. But welcome, great to be here.
And then we have Chetna. She's basically a very experienced and accomplished CIO. That's one of the perspectives that we wanted to get today. And do you want to...
Sure. Chetna Mahajan, Chief Digital and Information Officer at Amplitude. Prior to that, CIO ex-ZoomInfo, and been in the industry both on the engineering, professional services, and IT combined for 25 years. Oh my God. And I'm excited to be here. Super excited to talk about the AI journey in different companies and our perspective. Happy to share that.
And finally, we have Ashish. He's an accomplished product leader, then turned founder. He's right now CPO and CTO for Productive. And he'll give you some background.
Yeah, thank you for having me. We already kind of productive. We are a B2B startup. SaaS management is what we do. She's a multi-time customer. He's an advisor and an investor. This might be my panel actually. But yeah, we are doing AI, obviously, like many companies, heavily interested in this, heavily invested in that. And so we'd love to talk through, some of the challenges and some of the observations we are seeing ourselves or in our customer base, because we actually track applications that, well, everybody is using. So we kind of know about the ecosystem.
Right, awesome. And just to tell you a little bit about me and Chisel, as I said, I'm the founder and CEO of Chisel. Chisel is basically a product management platform. And I'm sure all of you have come across roadmap software. So the obvious question is, why is Chisel different than that? And we basically, we stand apart just on two things. One is we are a two-in-one platform. So we don't not only have roadmaps, but we have feedback integrated tightly into the roadmap in every aspect. We have first-party feedback collection tools. And second is we are very heavy on AI and automation. So you can do things like, pick a few ideas in Chisel and say that create a PRD automatically. Or you can say that create a status report automatically for the month of June. And it kind of saves you a lot of time. Prior to Chisel, I've had a variety of experiences. I'm a two times founder. I've worked as a VP of product in another startup. And prior to that, I was at Microsoft. And so I was head of product in Office 365, built the entire Windows App Store from the ground up, and also worked on Xbox. That was the cool part in the very early part of my career. So yeah, just to give you a little bit of context on what we are trying to do here, this is essentially just a way for us to get like-minded product leaders together and give them a chance to do two things. One, we pick a topic that we think is interesting to many product leaders. And so we get to have a close, lively interaction on that particular topic. And the second thing is we want to create a community like this, right? Where it is not like, all of you might have had invites for meetups, right? And they end up being like, you go there are a few people there. It's just a question of happy hour or something like that. We want to create something a little more focused, where we pick topics, we get people who are really experts at talking about that, and then combine that with some kind of a get-together or a happy hour, so networking session, so to say. So we'll do a lot more of these. Most of you might already know this, but if you don't, we have another session coming up on Tuesday, which is in Peninsula in Palo Alto. And that topic is the future of product management, where we will have a panel where there are people who are very senior leaders from companies like Google, Facebook, and Tesla, etc. And we will talk about how product leaders are thinking about how the discipline of product management is going to evolve. So just a quick background. The format today is that we're going to do the panel discussion. I have a few questions that I want to ask the experts over here. And then we will open it up for just a general conversation. So you are welcome to ask any question to any of the members in the panel. So we will do this for about 20-25 minutes, and then we will open up for a kind of open interaction for another 15 minutes or so. And after that, we will continue with the happy hour networking kind of a session until 8 o'clock. So that's basically the plan for the day. You know, to start with, I'm going to ask you my favorite question,
Sure.
Which is like, when, a lot of people, when they think about AI, there are some very interesting use cases that come to their mind, or there are some very interesting, they have their favorites, right? That this is what we could do best using AI. And so I think, like over here, my question to the panel would be that, when, for example, Yousuf thinks of a AI investment, what are the kind of use cases or what are the areas that attract him the most that I want to invest in this, right? Or for instance, when Chetna thinks about that as a CIO, what are the scenarios that she kind of comes across, which Chetna feels like in my company, I want to actually invest in these scenarios for my organization. And finally, when Ashish thinks about it, right? Ashish actually has two kind of unique things to bring to the table. One, he has his own opinions as a product leader, but more importantly, because he's in Productive, and Productive is essentially a SaaS management company. And so Productive gets to see what other customers are doing, their customers, in terms of where they are investing, which SaaS applications they are investing, which has AI. So I want to start with Yousuf.
Yeah, sure.
On the capital part, right?
Yeah.
What excites you in terms of areas for AI where as a VC, you are excited to invest?
So, I think look, post-November 2022, and the adoption of something like ChatGPT I think it's been in a generation. The solution is coming to market and it's been adopted at the speed that has 100 million signups in less than 10 days. And that, of course, created a lot of excitement. So, number one, to iterate, is definitively a lot more excitement about the space. And that also has created a whole bunch of opportunity to create products and companies around those products. So our daily job is to be able to meet with founders who are building interesting products. Definitely a substantial increase in the number of companies who are professing or at least advertising to say that they are building an AI product. So let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing and kind of what's common. One thing which is relatively common is where there's a very clear vertical use case, where a team, not necessarily having a degree of domain expertise, but some do, have decided that they worked in an industry, or they've observed or spoken to tons of people in that particular domain. They've understood the problem and they said, this could be solved through a great AI application. So we've met everything from a company that's looking to accelerate workers' comp insurance claim process and being able to completely streamline that and automate that entire process, right down to looking at computer vision companies on the factory floor. And then there's some bit more interesting ones, which is pretty common, is about an AI application which is solving an internal business process. That seems to be the most common one. So we interviewed a number of CIOs in the past, and one of the things that they'd said was, one of the biggest problems that we think a great opportunity is demand forecasting. Demand forecasting, which sounds crazy, but like 20, 30 years has basically been an Excel uplift. Like that's all it is. Back and forth of, megabytes and gig size, basically Excel sheets with file names called v1.26 underscore do not change, right? It's kind of that, literally going back and forth. And so they're saying, could you basically solve that problem? And it's a perfect use case. Lots of structured data, very clear, be able to think about the parameters and be able to solve for that. And then the other piece is, which has been really interesting, is think about AI companies that are building products to accelerate sales or impact revenue. In any macro downturn, the question is that you could use a great SaaS management solution like Productive, which will give you insight into where your OpEx costs are and how you can optimize those. And then the other piece to that is, can you deploy an AI solution that could improve revenue? So there are no shortage of solutions that are ingesting data and being able to provide an intelligence layer for different types of use cases. We're seeing companies that are saying that they can improve sales outcomes by taking ZoomInfo data, external data, be able to come up with intelligence and be able to drive action towards that. We've seen companies in engineering support. For example, companies that are looking to say, well, look, software engineers are difficult to hire and at least retain. Nobody wants to have a support operation. Is this a data-driven exercise which could have autonomous resolution towards it? So it's a mixed, but what's consistent is that there is a wide swath of applications. Using AI at the center is vastly different than what we've seen in the past. And in the past, you would have companies like, here's a new observability solution that we're going after with a very set addressable market. Now you're seeing people who, they're like, I just graduated out of college, or I was working at Amazon, or I'm working at one of the tech companies, one of the verticals that I was looking at. So they don't necessarily have domain expertise, but they can clearly see a solution that's being built. And so definitively, as a result, you're seeing an increase in volume of the application of AI. It's still very early to tell, right? And so the way I would end that is to say, the best things about AI really haven't been invented yet.
So from my perspective, mine is more things that you probably more on a mature side. What I've seen, at least at Amplitude and a few other companies, is really on the lot of focus on the assists. So AI assists, whether it is Copilot for code generation, whether it is for customer services, I'm seeing a lot of that resolution. So that's been more on the productivity side of the house, lots of focus on that. Then the other use case that is big at Amplitude is really content generation. So I'm seeing that more on the marketing side and also on the sales and customer success side, where they're auto-generating targeted emails. That's being used quite a bit now. HR, G&A functions are pretty much content generation for job requisitions and things like that. Another use case that is becoming very popular within Amplitude is around helping improve the data quality of the leads that are going into the SDRs, outbound, inbound. So it's helping with the still productivity of the SDRs and salespeople, but really helping with the conversion going up. That's helping quite a bit. Then enterprise search is big. You guys have probably all heard of Glean, so that's something that we're using. It's a Birthright app now for us, but really helping us quite a bit on all fronts. I've heard good things about Glean implementations. The experience is really good. And I'm also very curious of the true top-of-line AI solutions. I've not seen that yet, but I'm really, really curious. You talked about process mining. So there are two things that I'm exploring, which we haven't made decisions yet, but on a POC is around process mining for a lot of business processes. Because it's so hard to tell the business that, hey, technology is not a silver bullet for everything. It's just you need to fix your process, clean the data, and then let's use technology to automate all of that. So that is the hard story to sell. So really trying to get the process mining automated so that we can streamline our business processes before we automate. So that's one area that I'm exploring. The other one is very exciting, which a few companies have already tried, the AI avatars. Those are really good ones. I'm exploring a product called Synthesia. That's another one where, text-generated videos, like text-to-video conversions, and helping the enablement team. Especially as a CIO, we do so many digital transformations at Amplitude, and getting the field enabled with that, we're struggling with our internal enablement team. So it's a great extension and a perfect way to manage it going forward.
If the question is what is already a hit or what's working, well, we all know the answer, right? It's very early days. So if there's no clear, this is the major use case that we are seeing, every customer has deployed it, every customer is using it beyond ChatGPT, right?
So that's the basic.
Right. So, and that's unapproved in most customers, by the way. So you might be seeing that or not. But what we are seeing is really two things. One is there is so much curiosity with this new tech, especially because of Gen AI. AI has been around for a decade or more. Gen AI is relatively new, but it has generated a buzz. So we are seeing everybody wants to try their hands at it. Whether it is the SDR saying, can I auto-generate some emails or whatever, right? Or everybody just trying their hands at ChatGPT saying, okay, how to summarize something or what's the answer for something. We are seeing that use of ChatGPT naturally is a top shadow IT. We track shadow IT apps which are not approved but are still being used in an enterprise, and ChatGPT has now overtaken everything else to be number one shadow IT app. The CIOs don't love it, but it is there. But the other thing we are seeing is that, at least in our tech customers, everybody is trying to build their own AI solution. They want to use AI. So there is a lot of exploration we see including in productive, right? We have our own, what we call sidekick. It's a chatbot to help you use productive and get more insights out of productive. But we are seeing a lot of customers do that. I know Chisel is also thinking a little bit in that direction, maybe, or in automatic generation of PRDs or documents. But we are seeing everybody playing with the fundamentals of Gen AI to say, what can we do to enhance our product? So it's not that net new products apart from ChatGPT have shown up in the portfolios, but AI has shown up in the existing products. You may already be using Zoom. We all do. But now there's this thing in Zoom which will automatically listen to your conversations, summarize it, and send you a note later on.
That can be scary too.
GitHub Copilot is there.
Yeah.
I haven't heard super great stories about it actually generating code which is being deployed to production. Some stories where it actually works, but it's not as good as.
Yeah, it's not 25% productive, it's probably 6 or 7%.
Yeah, it's nowhere close to where Sam says it is.
I think the other thing is that building an AI product is vastly different to what it has been in the past, right? And I think the vectors around that, which is something that I think people have underestimated, there is difference. Every time you have a major technological shift in an industry, it will have a whole bunch of effects downstream, whether it's new skills being developed, prompt engineering, new cyber threats that basically happen that could basically be nefarious, data poisoning, model exhaustion, as well as just basically new techniques and how to be able to do that. If you have been building a software product or a SaaS product over time, there have been enough cycles around that, right? The industry has matured over time in how you were able to build software. Now, I'm not saying AI products haven't been around, but there hasn't been enough data and enough cycles for somebody to say, that's a standard. That's how we should basically build it. And that creates a degree of complexity. And so when you have in enterprises, whether you're a CIO, whether you're a product management organization, or whether you're a founder, and you're trying to basically build it, you have to think about things that did not apply to when you previously built a product. You never had to think about how you not just have data that's sitting there in a SaaS product, you have to think about data that's coming in the form of a model, and how that model is updated and how that model impacts your future iteration, basically, right? How you secure that is vastly different than how it was before. How you take the feedback loop may be autonomous, right? I mean, you didn't have that when you basically deployed out a product and you tried to do A/B testing, you'd be able to do that. Well, with AI products, they can do their own A/B testing, right? That takes out a whole bunch of different loops. And I think most people have not, that's going to be the mistake. The companies that will do well are the ones who take an approach, hopefully using Chisel, but be able to actually figure out how you are able to build a best-in-class product in a way that's relevant, because there'll be probably lots of good products.
Relevancy is very critical.
But the thing that most people underestimate, it's very unforgiving.
Yes.
Right? Like, you think about your own experience using a chatbot in customer service. Like after the second or third try, you're like really annoyed.
Very.
You're like, what is the point of this? And so that applies to internal products.
Yeah.
You start using a CIO says, well, can you please use a chatbot or please use this? And they start using it and it doesn't work. Maybe like switched off. Right? And so I think
backfires then, yeah.
So I think structuring and how you build out products, both internally and externally with AIs, I think is vastly different. And I think that providing frameworks for that and having conversations and forums to be able to do that is actually kind of critical.
When organizations are trying to adopt AI and buy some products, right? How has the due diligence process of purchasing software changed? Because I think there's a bunch of concerns that I've heard, right? But I think what would be really useful is, for instance, Yousuf, you may have a bunch of insights based on what your portfolio companies are telling you. Like Chetna, you have first-hand insights as a buyer CIO. What are you worried about, or what are you excited about? And then similarly, Ashish, you have a bunch of things. We'd love to
I think Chetna has probably a strongest vantage point because she's been a buyer across multiple companies. And she understated because prior to ZoomInfo, you led IT at Aptus, correct?
Aptus,
Right.
yes.
So you've done enterprise software and then Symantec as well before that. So at large scale, big scale, etc. So like you've seen buying cycles. Like selling a security product to Symantec, that's a fool's errand to a certain extent. It's like what is your security like? And you're like, well, it's really good. They're like, really? Is it good as ours? I don't know. I don't think so. So that's a problem.
Yeah.
Minus those, what have been the top concerns like that you've got?
Yeah, so I think from our vantage point, something, and we've created a AI council just for these kind of things, and there are two ways we are kind of exploring and adapting AI technologies. One is your existing systems landscape. So AI features that they're enabling, such as Salesforce, Zoom, and others, that we are more open to trying because we've already gone through the whole scrutiny. So in our procurement process, we have two separate ones. One is when we're enabling an AI feature within an existing tech stack, we're going back to the drawing board when it comes to security, compliance, and there's certain things that are coming up like ethical audits and bias audits. So making sure in their terms and conditions we're updating those so that we're covered when it comes to that. We already have MSAs or agreements in place on the existing compliance such as GDPR and others, but we're making sure that encompasses all the net new technology. So that's one for the existing tech. For any net new tech, the scrutiny is really, really strong. There's additional audits that go into AI compliance. We're also asking them if they can expose how they are creating their LLM models, like basically sharing how the decision points are being made. Not all companies do that, but some are open to doing that, especially the newer ones. So we're not looking for the secret sauce, but just like how they're making those decisions so we can determine how biased they are. Reputation of those companies is another thing that we're looking into when we are purchasing those. And then every net new AI tool is required to go through POC and at least making sure that we are looking at the existing tech stack for those features and before we purchase, and then additional at least one more competitor. So very strict. People are definitely nervous, especially the security team. So they are definitely making sure. We're also looking at how they're building and what tools have they used. Then the other thing is, as you mentioned, we're really where they're getting the data from. Very critical to get their entire data policies understood end to end.
Yeah, as a vendor, I'll tell you where we are seeing. We are again, smallish vendor or medium-sized vendor. I mean, we are not a Symantec. But regardless, what I see is really two different kind of CIOs or buyers, concerns or mandates. One is the laggard adopters, right? Who come in and say, hey, look, we don't know how this thing is going to play out. We don't know what we don't know. Yes, you can give us all the assurances of this is how you're using our data, this is how you're training, inferencing, blah, blah, blah. We don't even know if Microsoft or whoever else you are using is going to honor what you think they're going to honor, right? We don't know where our data is going. So they come with a very blanket thing. Can you or can you not turn off every single AI feature in your product before we buy you? And they want to turn it off, right, from the very get-go. We are seeing, many instances of it that this is a thing, saying we don't want to figure it out. Let the market mature, let the process mature. And then there are those who come in who are excited about at least the value that they see in whatever use case we are solving via AI or Gen AI. And then they say, hey, look, it's fine. We understand the value. We are excited to try it. However, show us the details a little bit more. We at least want to make sure that our data will not be used to train a model that can be used by other customers, or like our data will not be used by even your sub providers like an OpenAI or Anthropic or Llama. Like you will not pass the data in such a fashion that these guys can retrain their models. They're like, you can use the data for inferencing, but not for fine tuning or training yourself or the base model. It's a very interesting conversation when that happens. It gets into deep tech, into like, here are the boundaries, this is how you're ensuring it. But those are kind of the two things we see. But people are very worried about data. How is it going to be used? And do you even know that, like, you can promise, Ashish, that no, it's not being used, but you don't really know. Because you're using third-party technology also, right?
To build on that, definitely on the data piece, and it's actually twofold. One is it's for people who are building a product and building a company around it. As I'd mentioned, like how you build an AI product. Now you actually think about data storage and residency in a very different way than how you had in it before, right? If you're on an AWS platform, no offense to Azure, but you would basically think about whether it's an S3 bucket or a subfolder that you want to be able to have in that bucket and be able to easily delineate and be able, maybe you say, okay, I'll go put it into a customer's VPC, and that's also fine, right? Now it's not about where it's stored, it's about where it may go, what it may be used for. And the problem that a lot of companies have is they're not very well enabled to have that conversation, right? So this is where a lot of companies and a lot of products make a mistake is, it could be self-sign-up. Like there's no shortage of those solutions. Every single day I get a newsletter, which is probably AI generated, by the way. And very nicely done. I was very high quality. It's like, hey, how's it going? Good to hear from you. I'm like, really? Who is this? Right? But thanks for reaching out, right? And be like, here are the 5 solutions that are out there in the market. And you're like, wow, that's super, super interesting. You can sign up to it and you start using it as you've done with ChatGPT and a whole bunch of others. The point I was making is you'll have those companies and those products in place. But for enterprises, that conversation is now happening at the general counsel level. And there's 2 reasons. One is the purpose of training. And the second is then you start having conversations like, tell me how you secure not just your environment, but how you secure that data, because the last thing you want to have is a mixing and matching of it. Yeah. The second concern is a much bigger one, which is actually you go and say, tell me how you update your models. Tell me how you secure your models. Tell me which models you're using and whether you're using the most latest ones. Now, every time you have a major shift in an industry or in the world, the language of everyone changes, right? I don't want to bring back trauma during the COVID pandemic, but I guarantee it, the use of Pfizer and Moderna was not in our vernacular. They're like, oh, is that N95 or do you have some PPE? I'm like, have you done the Moderna or Pfizer one? Oh, I don't know. It's not vodka and whiskey, it's literally a vaccine. But we were speaking about this in, not leader experts, but you basically see it. And so on the buyer side, people start asking questions. Like in the past, you would not have that, right? Because we're probably in the right geography or otherwise. But not necessarily the case. People will say, well, why are you using Claude? But like, oh, well, because I think it's like this. Like, yeah, but I read somewhere you can't update this, and what happened here? Like, yeah, you're right. I couldn't believe that happened. Right? So, like,
there's a breach here.
So
there's a breach
the point I'm making is that what you're buying as an enterprise is a product, and you want that product to be updated and best in quality, right? Now, I spoke to a machine learning team at Apple. And they said the same thing. They were like, we've looked at a bunch of model training and hallucination type products and that can do that. And that's a different scale, like terabytes of data every single day. And they said, if you bring in data from, say, Safari or a browser, you're seeing stuff that's coming through the web. Now you have a new zeitgeist, something that's coming into place. I don't know. The latest one was Finsta, which apparently stands for fake Instagram. How do you train the model to be able to protect that, right? Or new issues that sort of come into place that are happening out there, but you haven't said, oh, by the way, let's pick that up and update our model, right? And that becomes a bit of a problem in enterprises because people are like, I'm deploying this out to 1,000 employees as a CIO, right? And I've said, hey, please update, make sure you're basically able to come up with an outgoing email campaign based on this product offering. And they're like, I'm not sure what that product offering is, but I'll come back to you. Like immediately you've lost all value and credibility. Yeah. And so the problem is that most people translate that as, oh, it's a compliance and a general counsel. It's actually not. It's like, I'm buying a product. If you think about cars now, that's a software update that happens every other couple of months. Mm-hmm. It's fixing a bunch of bugs, but it's also basically up-leveling a whole bunch of functionality. You pay for that. And so that buying paradigm extends in the enterprise. And the expectations that you didn't have that in the past. That's a challenge that will basic people have, and be able to articulate that is really hard.
To echo a couple of things that you guys mentioned, right? When in our experience of when we are talking about the AI parts of Chisel as a product, we've noticed 2 things that you mentioned, right? One was, and Ashish also mentioned this, that there are 2 kinds of customers we are coming across. There's one side of customers who are very enthusiastic about adopting AI. And that's the first thing that they really get excited about. They want to try the product for that. They want to buy the product for that.
They ask you, do you have that yet?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there are other customers where they have actually bought our platform, but they have not started using AI yet. Because what they are doing is they're saying, look, we love the platform as it is. We're going to buy this. We're going to start using it. But we will, in parallel, audit the AI component. Yeah. And so the AI component is almost like late binding, that at some point their internal review team gives a green signal to the AI, and until that they use the platform without the AI. The second interesting thing that we've come across is that some customers actually care about your final provider. So they would ask us, you are using some kind of LLM behind this, right? Is it OpenAI? Is it Azure AI? Those are the two we come across quite a bit. And they actually have a bias or a preference because one of them is approved internally to their company and one of them is not. And so, in fact, for that reason in Chisel, we actually have an abstraction layer that we are able to configure depending on what the customer is saying, that do they prefer for us to use OpenAI as an underlying model, or do they prefer to use Azure AI as the underlying model? And so we have a federation layer built in where we send the data depending on what the customer actually has a preference for configuration.
Yeah, we have that too.
Any questions or any things that come out?
Comments?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
So I want to double click on Ashish said that, the customers who say, help me build trust with the fact that you're using the AI models correctly. Do you have any tips on what to tell them? Dude, we got this under control?
These customers, you should assume, and we do, that they don't want a boilerplate answer. They don't want an answer of, hey, just trust us, or here's a slide and with some boxes around there and just trust that it works. They want to have an actual intelligent conversation. The person on the other side really knows what they are talking about.
Yeah, we'll bring our architects.
Exactly. So don't send the sales guy into the conversation. No offense to sales
And
guy.
don't generate a Visio diagram using AI and send it.
Yes, let's not do that, right? Let's take our engineers. Let's actually do a whiteboard, or if you develop kind of a document or some prepared material, say, look, this is how this thing actually works. These are the controls we have put in place. This is how the data is anonymized. These are the things that we put restrictions on Microsoft Azure. There's a provision in there that they cannot retrain their model using the data that we provide to them. And so on and so forth. You have an intelligent conversation. You have a deep conversation. You cannot hand wave it.
Yeah, and for companies where data is an IP, for the last two companies, current and past, it's a big deal.
Yep.
I ran customer success at Moveworks, which is an enterprise AI company. And the problem that you have with all of your customers is they don't have any reference points, right? When you basically bought a CRM, it was Salesforce versus Oracle versus SAP, right? It would be like, okay, I'm going to compare that to whichever solution. Now you're basically buying an enterprise AI solution that does this. Can you really have companies that have been around that you can actually compare it to? So that's one aspect of it. My suggestion, for what it's worth, and did a blog post around it, which is really about basically create a buying guide for your solution, which ultimately is both for internal enablement, but also for customer enablement, which basically says, and if you are confident in a product, when you actually stand by a product, it's a lot easier, authentic conversation. So I created a buying guide because we turned up to CIOs and they'd be like, great demo, that's an amazing product. And they're like, how much do I pay for this? How do I buy it? Having a very clear set of steps about saying, how do you think about my product? Why it is impactful? And then the other pieces is like, here's what you should be thinking about. And here's how we think about it. A classic issue that most companies have, especially in enterprise software, was like, oh, we don't have all of our SOC 2, Type 2, and all the security things around it. It's always a big concern. And most people didn't understand is actually most security teams, I've been a CIO and a CISO, weren't expecting early stage companies to be all security compliant. I mean, we understand your early stage companies, but we want you to basically signal to us that you care about security. So actually, the smart security teams who actually understood that this is a transformational product with an early stage team that could be impactful, what you actually want to articulate is to say, here's our plan for security.
Yes.
Here are the things we put into place. Here are the things we don't have but are on our radar, and we're going to basically do that. And that actually works to your advantage because it creates a relationship with your customer to be able to say, keep me honest. And at least I'm telling you how I'm thinking about it, right? What doesn't work is when you are not able to demonstrate what your roadmap is, not just from a product standpoint. Like, first of all, having the visual and standing by it is in itself actually impactful, but the actual articulation of them talking about what's so difficult about building product, this is completely understated. Like, if you are an early stage company, or if you are even launched and you're selling and stuff, CIOs, whether they're big, medium, or small companies, will always ask the question, why can I not do this myself?
Yeah.
Even the biggest companies in the world, they look at a lot of these solutions, they're like, there's a lot of companies, by the way, who will never touch OpenAI. They will never touch these models. They're like, actually, we've got a ton of data. We've been around 50 plus years.
We have
We
data
know
scientists.
we're data scientists, we're a chemical company, we're a healthcare company. We've got a bunch of data that we already have here. We have like more PhDs than they're around. Maybe we should be building our own foundational model. That's a very realistic thing that people want to go towards. And so when you're not able to have a conversation which aligns, then that is a renewal problem, right? And I say this all the time, you're like really excited, I'm going to buy this product in place. And then you're not able to update the model, you're not able to support it, you're not able to talk about security, there's a problem, your support process goes on. The blast radius for these sort of negative interactions is huge. And eventually people are like, I read something else, and this one's out there, and I'm easy replacing, and that basically works.
So you mentioned that like you have a sort of elongated process to approve and sort of validate these AI technologies. I'm a little bit curious because I know there are products where the AI is sort of ancillary to what their core product is, right? We use this DevOps tool called Highlight, right? Where it's very much error logging, but they have a sort of assistant that helps us debug messages, right? But it's not core to the product necessarily. And then there's obviously products that the actual product can only function with AI. Do you treat those two, we'll say, archetypes of companies differently through your process when it comes to like approve whether or not you want to buy them or not, or is it somewhat the same?
If it's an existing tech and they're turning on the AI features, it's a different scrutiny just because it's a trusted product. But still, we don't turn it on just because it's an AI. Like Zoom, it took us 3 months. So we just recently turned on the AI companion. So we did go through the whole process. We enabled the employees, making sure that, hey, when you turn it on, make sure your one-on-one conversations, they get recorded. These are the people who have access to the documented things. So it's very important to understand it's the implications behind it and making sure everybody is knowingly, willingly adopting this functionality. Same with Salesforce when they turned on their AI assist for engagement. Same scrutiny. So we do have scrutiny, but it's a different type of scrutiny. So less so because, again, as I said, the company is trusted. But on the net new products, there's a lot more. For the existing ones, we revisited the contract, the terms and conditions, making sure the AI capability piece is covered. That they are making sure that we did turn off all our OpenAI, can train the model with our data. So making sure all the T's crossed and I's are dotted. And the net new ones, definitely a lot more, because if it's just new kid on the block when nobody else has tried it, I mean, usually you won't get the approval for those kind of things, but we also want to be innovative. So we start with POCs that is enforced for any new AI-centric product. I gave you an example of Clean. Even though a lot of companies had tried it was good, but we still did a POC before, made sure, everything is covered in terms of our GRC, not just security, but also our risk assessment and everything is also taken care of. Legally also we are covered because it's enterprise search. It highlighted a lot of other security gaps, by the way, just during a POC.
Yeah. And sometimes it depends on the application. When Productive was first started, there was 3 other companies in the space.
That's true, yeah.
Right? So actually sometimes like Glean, enterprise search, plus maybe a handful of really credible companies that you can actually deploy in the enterprise. The way they manage data and performance support is vastly different than how it would be for Productive and others.
Yeah.
So it will depend on the application.
Yep.
That is a challenge, but it's also a huge opportunity for you to be kind of defining that.
I have a follow-up question. Do you guys send your architects, your software developers? Who do you send on those kind of conversations? Obviously not the sales guys, right?
So you have to send, or at least we send, 2 types of people. One, people with authority to say, yes, we guarantee this, what we are saying is actually what is happening. And then if he or she cannot go deep, somebody who says, look, yes, this person can talk all the way down to the last line of code, what is happening. In those conversations, the goal is to build trust, right? I mean, that's the main goal. But also the paradigm is a little bit different than the usual things that we have heard, right? I sometimes hear either show, don't tell, or tell, don't show. It depends. Salespeople will say, hey, just tell the story. Don't worry about the sausage making. So tell, don't show, because then the customer gets scared. Or on the other side, people say, look, show, don't tell me the conclusion, just tell me the entire story. My learning so far is it's not an or, it's an and. Show and tell. Tell the story deep enough because assume the other person is very intelligent, they want to know. But because this thing has not been defined, as Yousuf was saying, like, they may not even know, right, how to evaluate your answers into saying, did my question get answered? Be very declarative, right? We literally put in very specifically at the top, the tell part. your data will not be used to train or fine tune any goddamn model, right?
Right.
Not gonna happen. That's the tech. Now we're gonna show how we can back that up, right? How will we use your data to only for inference, only in, for example, an anonymized form or what have you. Now let us show you so that they can hang on to those declarative statements. So show and tell is what the thing is. And so you need a person who can stand behind the tell. Like I am the authority, I'm telling you this is true, I'll stand by, I'll guarantee it. And then a person who can show. That makes sense?
Yep. Good advice.
Hey, good questions, Vivek.
There's a question there.
You mentioned, Chetna, that you are updating your agreements, how you're going to update for the model bias, for the safety of if the model is biased. How do you think about that?
Right now, what our legal teams are going back to wherever we're enabling AI or whenever we are purchasing, they're making sure, training the model, they're not using our data in any way, shape, or form. And also, it's a cloud solution, so they are storing our data. So making sure that even with the new AI feature, they are still compliant through all GDPR and all of that. Because sometimes even that is not true depending on what the solution is. So making sure all that is revisited. In terms of bias and ethical, there is something called ethical compliance. I don't know if bias compliance is part of that. But so making sure they're certified. There's something called, they get a certification for that. And so they are certified for that.
Part of the challenge is the solution that you're typically using where there is a potential for bias that could be detrimental from a branding perspective.
Yeah.
So
Sales forecast was one example.
sales forecasting is one. The other one is, actually on the recruiting side, this is the one that's I'm not a big fan of, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that, you have tons of applications coming in and you're using an AI solution to be able to review those. That is asking for, you have to be a pretty stellar model to be able to do that. Somewhere down the line, that is not going to end up going well. It's not going to end up well for the individual, and it's definitely not going to end up going well for the company on a branding standpoint. So that's one angle to it. The other way to think about it is just basic direction when you look to try and do something from afar. And by that I basically mean is a bias equals how you manage the data. So for example, if you have put a model in place and you haven't got the techniques in place to look at bias, the blast radius of it could be very, very far away. And that could affect everything. Think about it, if you're doing a sales forecasting solution, right? And you're basically saying, okay, here's a predictive thing aspect, and it's like 40% saying, oh, optimistic, and like everyone around the room saying, we are never gonna meet that goal, right? Like that has completely lost all sense of credibility, right? And it's not something that you can say, oh, can you just adjust that? Like you can't adjust it, right? That's literally saying, oh, by the way, both this AI solution and it has all of this data, and it basically came up with this prediction. The last thing I'll say is it's interesting because Formula One has, of course, become much more into the mainstream. It is a great example of the use of technology versus human judgment. Just the 400 plus sensors in a Formula One car. And so the Singapore Grand Prix is a street circuit, and they convert Singapore main city, and they're basically going around. And at one time, the former Mercedes driver, Valtteri Bottas, was always complaining about losing power. It was super weird. So going through, and to give you some context, there are 200 people in a factory every time there's a race for every single Formula One team sitting in their factory, in their workshop in the UK or Italy. And then there's 50 or 100 people on the track. And they're just looking at all of this sensor data, and they're basically computing and trying to figure out the milliseconds, et cetera, et cetera. And Valtteri Bottas basically was saying, I'm losing power, right? And they're like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. He says, I'm telling you, I feel that this is, and now to think about it, now Formula One is like, it's milliseconds, right, in terms of guidance. Well, it turns out that when they actually did the review of it, they discovered that actually because it's a street circuit, there was a steel bridge, and that was causing a magnetic field. And so when the car was basically going through, it was basically being pulled. He felt it, right? And he said, I'm losing power. You guys are, this is not right. Like something's not right here. And they were like, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything's totally fine, right? And so there's this aspect, and the reason I mentioned that is, the last example I'll give you is, there's companies that are coming into place that are reviewing security questionnaires, okay? So you're a sales team, you're trying to get a security questionnaire, you're gonna buy this solution, you send the last 3 security questionnaires in place, and it reviews it, and it completes the next security questionnaire 80% complete. fantastic. So sales individual, they're like, amazing. I don't need to spend a week. I don't need to get the security individual team member who's already doesn't want to talk to me because I'm a sales guy and I want to be able to deploy it out. I'm just using this solution. We send this out. So this was great. This was happening. And then they discovered, the sales team were like, wait, we're sending them really fast. We're also getting responses really fast. And what happened was that there were a whole bunch of other companies that were selling to procurement teams for reviewing security questionnaires, redlining them and sending them back, right? And so basically, you basically have the salesperson would be sending a security questionnaire, their solution over there would review it automatically, redline it and send it across, basically. And they were like, well, you don't have two-factor then. Oh, yes, we do. I think we do. Well, I don't think it's very strong enough, basically. Somewhere down the line, procurement team, sales team got so annoyed, they kind of stopped and be like, okay, hold on a second. Let's take it easy. The point I'm making is the blast radius of getting it wrong could be very consequential. That didn't happen with cloud and SaaS solutions. If you miss an opportunity object in Salesforce, no one's going to get offended. It's just the data error, etc. You send out an auto-generated email with the wrong language and to say that, Ashish is not productive. Or that has a major impact. Somebody's going to get fired at product. Somebody's going to get fired at product. It sounded like a very good A/B testing, auto-generation solution that only costs $50 to do. But somebody's going to get fired for that because the blast radius is very substantial. That's the key thing to think about. Right? So as you build out products, thinking about use case and getting feedback loop is vastly different.
It's funny you mentioned that, by the way, just a side note.
By the way, just so you know, I do think you're productive. That's why I invested money.
Auto-generate, I get an email every week, like clockwork, right? Which is like, hey Ashish, we can still solve all your problems because you are a transportation and logistics provider. And I'm like, dude, like, get a hit. There's no dude on the other side, obviously. It's a
Kind regards, Yousuf Khan. They're like, I know that guy.
Why do you think we are a logistics provider? We are a software management company, but apparently some AI has decided that. But this is a low blast radius. I just get to delete that. Anyway.
Any other questions from the audience?
All of you have sort of talked about how there's a concern with these models sort of taking in the data and potentially being trained on it, right? And I think it's fair to say that the majority of products out there are not using a foundational model. They're probably using OpenAI, Anthropic, or some of these other providers, right? So if these products are built on top of these other model providers, how do you actually get that security that they're not going to use your data? For example, if the company is like, oh yeah, we're not going to use this data to do anything, you almost have to get the guarantee that OpenAI won't, right? Or Anthropic won't, or Google won't, right?
This has happened recently, so we make sure that they have a contract, it's covered. It's a super contract, and then you have your subcontracts within your providers, so they will share.
It's audit trail and good marketing.
Yeah.
Seriously,
So
we had to demonstrate that we were going to delete data after a POC when the customer didn't want to go, and we actually walked them through and did a screen say, okay, we're deleting. They're like, oh, okay, wow. Now we could do that in that case. Very, very difficult to do it. This is why a lot of these AI companies are raising the money they can, so they're establishing the brand, saying, oh yeah, that's a $6 billion company. I'm sure they've got their complete act together. They're like, no, they haven't.
They don't, exactly.
But this is not a new problem. As a seller, I'll tell you, yes, AI, this is a question you're asking. How do we know for sure that you are not going to use the data to fine-tune your model, and how do we know that your foundational thing, whatever, OpenAI is not going to abuse and retrain their model on that? But okay, fine, this is a question in Gen AI world, but the same question used to exist.
Any kind of.
For any technology, like previously the question was, how do we know you won't turn around and sell our data as is, and how do we know that AWS is not passing the data to Amazon Marketplace and will kill me as a competitor, right? And the answer is, hey, look, we have contracts, we have a process. Now at some point, we have a business to run. If we don't do what we are saying in written, we are signing on that line, our business will be over, right? And AWS, if they are doing some bullshit thing and it gets out that they are actually not honoring this thing, that's bye-bye AWS.
Last question, Jigal, you had a question.
Yeah, it's a very general question. Just as a buyer, let's say, how do you think about single tenant versus multi-tenant deployments? What are the decisions that goes into your thought process?
So from when I'm buying a product, do I prefer multi-tenant or?
Yeah, and is it are you seeing an increasing trend of maybe more on-prem more single tenant deployments?
No, actually, I would, at least from my perspective, I would prefer multi-tenant. It's better control, better failover. And so I'm actually biased the other way, so I don't prefer single tenant.
Part of that is practicality thing.
Yeah.
The reality is that most of your, at least in my viewpoint, is you probably put in more redundancy. You know, it's it's like, hey, we've got a bunch of big customers there. Make sure you look after that versus, they're pretty good. So I think part of that is, so that's one aspect of it in terms of scale. And that's just an educated buyer. On the other side is honestly the level of regulation. Sometimes it will basically be like, okay, I'm willing to basically take a little bit of an exception, and I would basically prefer that. And then the cost aspect that comes to it, which becomes a messy negotiation. I would default to multi-tenant unless it's expressly done, and that's when you start getting into conversation about VPCs and others, which is a whole different conversation.
So this has been a lively conversation. I think we are a little bit over time, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to thank our panel members. They took a lot of time out and shared the insights. Just a great and yeah.